Imagine waking up to find yourself the last man standing when everyone around you is dead. For George "Bugs" Moran, the notorious Chicago gangster of the 1920s, this wasn't just a nightmare, it was reality. The morning of February 14, 1929, was supposed to be just another day in the life of a bootlegger, but it turned into the infamous St. Valentine's Day Massacre, a day that would forever etch Bugs Moran's name into the annals of criminal history. Bugs Moran was never one for subtlety. With his hair slicked back and a perpetual scowl that made his nickname seem fitting, he was the epitome of a 1920s gangster. His North Side gang was in a brutal turf war with Al Capone's South Side gang, a conflict fueled by the lucrative business of bootlegging during Prohibition. Moran, with his unpredictable temper and a penchant for violence, was a thorn in Capone's side, a man who prided himself on his business acumen over brute force. On that fateful morning, Moran had received word of a special delivery, a truckload of whiskey at a bargain price. It was too good to pass up in an era where such commodities were gold. His men were to meet at the SMC Cartage Company garage on North Clark Street, a place well known to his gang as one of their many fronts. Moran was running late, a decision that would save his life. As he approached the garage, he noticed a police car parked outside. Thinking it was a raid, Moran, ever the cautious gangster, turned around and went to a nearby cafe, deciding to wait it out. Little did he know the police were actually men from Capone's gang, dressed to deceive. Inside the garage, 7 of Moran's men, including his right-hand man, awaited the whiskey delivery. When the fake officers entered, they lined up the unsuspecting gangsters against the wall under the pretense of an arrest. Moments later, the sound of gunfire echoed through the streets of Chicago, a cacophony of death that would signal the end for many but not for Bugs Moran. Moran, sitting in the cafe with a coffee in hand, watched from afar as the scene unfolded. He saw the men in uniform leave the garage, and soon after, a crowd gathered. His instincts told him something was dreadfully wrong. Leaving his coffee, he moved toward the commotion, only to be stopped by a police officer who was part of the genuine response team arriving at the scene. "Bugs, don't go in there," the officer, who was on Moran's payroll, whispered urgently. "It's a massacre." Moran's heart raced, but his face remained stoic. He knew what Capone was capable of, but this level of brutality was unprecedented. He turned away, his mind racing with plans for retaliation, but first, he needed to disappear. Capone had tried to take him out, and Moran knew the game had changed. The newspapers the next day screamed headlines about the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, detailing how 7 men had been gunned down by Capone's men disguised as police. Moran was quoted by reporters, his voice a mix of pain and rage. "Only Capone kills like that." For days, Moran was in hiding, moving between safe houses, his mind a whirlwind of strategy. He knew Capone had made a statement, but he wasn't out of the fight. He contacted his remaining loyalists, gathering them for a meeting in a nondescript warehouse far from prying eyes. "We're not done," Moran declared, to the small, tense group. "Capone thinks he can wipe us off the map, but we'll show him. We hit back harder, smarter." The plan wasn't just about revenge, it was about survival. Moran knew he couldn't match Capone's numbers or resources directly, so he had to be cunning. They would focus on Capone's weakest points, his ego, his businesses, and his supply chains. Moran decided to attack Capone's bootlegging operations, not with violence this time, but by outsmarting him in the marketplace. They began by intercepting Capone's shipments, selling them at a cut rate to undermine his profits. They spread rumors about the quality of Capone's liquor, damaging his reputation. Moran's gang also started to buy up properties near Capone's operations, effectively boxing him in and making it harder for him to expand. Moran's strategy was working, but it was a slow burn. He knew Capone would eventually retaliate, so he kept moving, never staying in one place too long. His life became a game of chess, with every move calculated to keep him one step ahead of Capone's wrath. Months passed, and Moran's campaign was taking a toll on Capone's empire. But the constant threat of assassination loomed over Moran like a dark cloud. One night, as he was leaving one of his secret meetings, he felt the cold steel of a gun against his back. "Time's up, Bugs," a voice hissed. Moran froze, his mind racing. He had been careful, but apparently not careful enough. However, luck, or perhaps his notorious reputation, played in his favor. The man behind him was not one of Capone's killers, but a rival gangster looking to make his mark by aligning with Moran. "I could kill you now, but I need you," the man said, revealing himself as Slim Gallagher, a lesser-known but ambitious gangster from the West Side. Moran, always quick to turn situations to his advantage, saw an opportunity. They struck a deal. Gallagher would provide muscle and information, while Moran would share his cunning and connections. Together they planned several hits on Capone's businesses, ensuring they were always one step ahead. This alliance changed the game for Moran. He was no longer just fighting for survival, but for dominance. They executed their plans with precision, hitting Capone where it hurt most, his wallet and his pride. However, the constant war wore on Moran. He was tired, always looking over his shoulder, and his health began to decline. The stress of living in the shadows, the endless plotting, it was taking its toll. By the mid-1930s, with Prohibition repealed, Moran's power waned. Without the bootlegging profits, his empire crumbled, and he turned to smaller crimes. In 1946, Moran was arrested in Kentucky for robbery, a far cry from the kingpin of the North Side. His life had come full circle, from a notorious gangster to a petty criminal. He died in 1957 in Leavenworth Federal Prison, not from a bullet, but from lung cancer, the last of his kind from that era. Bugs Moran's story is one of survival, cunning, and the ultimate defeat. On that day, in 1929, he cheated death, but in the end, time and circumstance caught up with him. Yet, in the annals of gangster lore, he remains a figure who, for one brief moment, defied one of the biggest names in crime, Al Capone, and lived to tell the tale. In his final years, Moran often reflected on that Valentine's Day massacre, the moment when he narrowly escaped death. He would recount tales to anyone who would listen, not just of the massacre, but of the life of a man who lived by the sword, yet died by the slow decay of illness. His legacy, while overshadowed by Capone's, was one of resilience. In the cold, stark walls of Leavenworth, Bugs Moran might have been a forgotten man, but in the streets of Chicago his name still whispered with a mix of fear, respect, and the bittersweet taste of what could have been.